I've never understood why, but from an early age, he seemed to gravitate toward the so-called weird kids. I could tell you dozens of stories, but there's one that sticks out like a thorn. George was in the 4th grade when this happened. We had just moved because of my husband's work reassignment, and George was the new kid at school. Thankfully, he was naturally outgoing and friendly, so we weren't too concerned about his ability to make friends. As a family, we were adjusting. Well, and things seemed to be going smoothly, especially at school. I was genuinely relieved. The first time I met the other parents in George's class, I was impressed. They all seemed like good, honest people. A few months after the move, I got a call from George's school, right in the middle of the day. One of his parents needed to come in to discuss an incident involving him and another student. N.A. Husband was at work, so I headed over. As I picked up George, I felt this mix of anger and confusion. Anger because I assumed he'd been in a fight, which was unacceptable, but also confusion because fighting was completely out of character for him. George had always been gentle, respectful, and kind. As I walked him toward the principal's office, he wouldn't answer a single question. That alone was unusual. George was typically a talker, sometimes even an oversharer. But now, silent. I assumed he was either embarrassed or scared, so I didn't push. The principal asked George to wait outside in the lobby. Once I was alone, in his office, he invited me to sit, then began asking basic questions. What's George like at home? Is he respectful? Does he follow rules? I had nothing but good things to say, and I wasn't just being a proud mom. George really was a well-behaved kid. Finally, the principal explained what had happened. George had apparently gotten into a brief altercation with a classmate named Sebastian. They were the last 2 kids walking in from recess, climbing the stairs, together. Out of nowhere, George pulled an eraser from his pocket and hit Sebastian over the head with it, knocking him down. I was stunned. That didn't sound like George at all, especially not with Sebastian. George had mentioned him before and always spoke fondly of him. They were friends, or so I thought. No teachers had witnessed the event, but both boys had confirmed the same basic details. Despite this, the principal assured me George wasn't in trouble. Fights among kids weren't uncommon. He just wanted me to be aware. I left the office feeling unsettled, but relieved it wasn't more serious. Still, George wouldn't speak a word about what had happened, not even on the drive home. It wasn't until right before bedtime that he finally opened up. I had gotten frustrated with his silence, and maybe that's why he broke. He told me that Sebastian had tricked him. I asked him what he meant, and the story he told me was shocking. Apparently, the 2 boys had been playing pretend, a make-believe version of Street Fighter. As part of the game, Sebastian told George to do a KO move with the eraser. George went along with it. The moment he hit Sebastian collapsed and screamed like he was seriously injured. Then, while lying on the floor, he whispered something terrifying in George's ear. "If you don't pretend like you attacked me, I'll really hurt you." George, terrified, played along. The teachers assumed it had been a real fight. No one suspected a thing. I was furious. My son had been manipulated, made to look like the aggressor. I decided not to involve the school again. Instead, I found Sebastian's mother's number in the directory and gave her a call. Her name was Maggie, and honestly, she sounded lovely, warm, sincere. She told me she'd already spoken to Sebastian, gotten the real story, and had reprimanded him. I was surprised he confessed so quickly, but relieved nonetheless. She went on to explain that Sebastian had always struggled a bit socially. Sometimes he acted like he was someone else entirely. According to Maggie, he'd seen doctors, but they thought it was something he'd outgrow. She even suggested a sleepover, a way for the boys to reconnect and patch things up. She offered to host. I agreed. That weekend, I brought George to her house. Maggie invited me in, and we chatted over a glass of wine while the boys played in the basement. She seemed like such a decent person. But eventually, I couldn't help myself. I asked more about Sebastian. Her mood shifted, her voice lowered. She admitted that his behavior had been concerning for a while. He had trouble making friends, and though doctors weren't sure what was going on, some had hinted at serious psychological concerns. Still, she insisted he wasn't violent, just a little odd. She assured me George would be perfectly safe. I believed her. When it came time to leave, I went down to the basement to say goodbye. The boys were laughing and playing Battleship, clearly enjoying themselves. Everything seemed fine. But the next morning, when I picked George up, everything changed. He was smiling when he came to the door, but as soon as we started driving, he broke down into tears. I asked him what happened. What he told me was jaw-dropping. That night, everything had been fine until bedtime. The boys were sleeping on 2 air mattresses in the basement. All seemed normal, but at some point, George woke up. Something felt off. He heard whispering. It was coming from the bathroom. The door was cracked open, and there was a strange, flickering light coming from inside. Not like the bathroom light, more like candlelight. George crept closer and heard Sebastian talking, but not to anyone. He was talking to the mirror, and he wasn't calling himself Sebastian. He was calling himself Mr. Jim. George froze. He realized Sebastian was having a full conversation with his reflection. Then the candle went out. In the pitch dark, George pretended to be asleep, but a while later, he heard the bathroom door creak open. Footsteps. Then, whispering. Right, above him. He didn't understand the words. They didn't sound like English. He was too scared to move. Eventually, Sebastian went back to bed. The next morning, he acted like nothing had happened. I was horrified. This wasn't imagination. Something was wrong. I called Maggie immediately. At first, she laughed it off, said Sebastian had a vivid imagination. But as I pushed, her tone changed. She finally admitted the truth. Sebastian had more serious issues than she'd originally let on. One psychiatrist had even mentioned dissociative identity disorder. They had already moved twice before due to school incidents. I was furious. Why hadn't she told me this earlier? Why put my son in that situation? Then she did something unexpected. She begged me not to report anything to the school. I didn't know what to say. Against my better judgment, I said okay and hung up. I told myself I'd decide what to do by the end of the week, but I never got the chance. That Monday, Sebastian attacked another student at recess. Badly. The school sent out a vague statement. Later that day, we found out he had been expelled. I tried calling Maggie, but her number was disconnected. Days passed. I couldn't shake the unease. I drove to their house. It was vacant. No moving truck. No sign of recent departure. Just gone. I searched online for any trace of them. Nothing. No forwarding address, no digital footprint. It was like they'd never existed at all. That was a long time ago. George, thankfully, wasn't too traumatized. I think he's mostly forgotten it. But I haven't. Sometimes, I still lie awake wondering, what really happened in that basement? And what kind of things that boy, Mr. Jim, has been doing since? I was raised in a Southern Baptist home, the kind where we didn't believe in ghosts, but we were absolutely certain that demons were real. Let me explain. If something strange happened, it wasn't a ghost or a wandering soul. It was something darker, biblical. I never fully bought into it, but the idea was drilled into me from a young age. Denying demons was denying scripture. My mother, though, she was different. Faith to her was optional. She wasn't an atheist or even agnostic, just indifferent. When I'd ask her why she didn't come to church, she'd wave me off with, "God and I have an understanding," while I clung to Religion as a source of structure and comfort, she drifted further from it. It was one of many things that deepened the space between us. I won't sugarcoat anything. My mother struggled with addiction, with her mental health, with stability. Some days she was functional, other days she was unrecognizable. Looking back, it's clear she had schizophrenia, or something close to it. But before you blame my family for ignoring it, remember, this was a different time. People didn't talk about those things, especially not in churches like ours. One afternoon, I had a nightmare, the kind that brands itself into your memory. I still remember every detail. In the dream, I was in bed when my mother stormed into the room screaming. Her face was twisted in rage. She grabbed my wrist and started shaking me violently. I woke up drenched in sweat, heart pounding, still half frozen from the fear. Before I could even process the dream, it happened. Exactly the same. The door burst open. My mother came charging in, same wild eyes, same fury, same exact words. It was like the dream had predicted it. I managed to push her away, yelling at her to stop. And just like that, it was over. She left the room as suddenly as she'd entered. When I confronted her the next morning, she had no memory of it. She seemed confused, maybe even a little hurt that I was so shaken. I told myself it was a coincidence, some bizarre overlap of subconscious fear and her unpredictable moods. But deep down, I started to wonder if it was something more. A few weeks later, I heard her screaming in the backyard. It wasn't a scream of fear, it wasn't panic, it was something else. Excited, joyful even. I know how strange that sounds, but it's the only way I can describe it. I rushed outside and froze. She was standing in the middle of the yard, grinning, holding a massive 7-foot-long snake in her bare hands. Now that would be terrifying on its own. But here's what made it worse. My mother was deathly afraid of snakes. Always had been. Couldn't even see one on TV without freaking out. And here she was, cradling one like a child's toy. She turned to me, smiling wider, and said, "Come here," motioning for me to take it. I backed up. Shaking my head, I said, "Mom, what the hell?" But the look in her eyes, it was like she didn't even hear me, like the words didn't register. She tilted her head, almost playful, almost threatening. I ran back inside, slammed the door, and locked it. I could still see her through the window, standing perfectly still holding that snake like an offering. Eventually, she let it slither away and walked back inside as if nothing had happened. When I brought it up later, she just shrugged and said, "You must have dreamed that." She refused to talk about it. And part of me wondered if she really didn't remember, or if something else was happening entirely. That winter, my church held an overnight lock-in. I was relieved. Church was my escape. A place full of structure, normalcy, predictability. My mom dropped me off totally sober, even kissed me on the forehead before driving off. Around 4:30 a.m., just as we were settling down to sleep, a loud knocking echoed through the chapel. We all sat up, exchanging uneasy glances. The knocking didn't stop. It moved, circling the building in a way that didn't make sense. Sometimes it sounded like it was coming from multiple places at once. This wasn't wind. It wasn't an animal. It was rhythmic, intentional. I ran to wake the pastor who had been asleep in his office. When he stepped into the chapel, the knocking immediately stopped. He opened the front doors and stumbled back in shock. Standing there, barefoot, disheveled, soaking with sweat despite the freezing air, was my mother. She didn't speak to him, didn't acknowledge him at all. Her eyes locked onto me. She smiled, a slow, chilling, inhuman smile. And then she started, walking toward me. The pastor tried to stop me, whispered, "Stay here," but I couldn't. It felt like I had no control over my body, like I had to go with her. I got in the car. I thought maybe she'd scream or lash out, but she didn't. She didn't say a word. The entire drive home was silent. When we got to the house, she paused at the front door and turned to look at me. She just stared. No words, no emotion. She watched me as I walked to my room, locked the door, and lay awake until morning. The next day, she was in the kitchen making pancakes. Cheerful, normal. When she saw me, she jumped and said, "I was just about to go pick you up from church." I felt the blood drain from my face. She had no memory of any of it. No memory of the knocking, no memory of driving me home. I kept expecting someone, the pastor, one of the chaperones, to say something about that night. But no one ever did. Maybe they didn't want to. That's kind of how people treated my mom back then. It's been decades since all that happened. She's gone now, but her memory, that version of her, still lingers with me. I don't know if I believe in demons anymore. I don't even know what I believe at all. The logical explanation is mental illness, addiction, withdrawal, something clinical. But the memory lapses, the eerie timing, the way she changed, it still haunts me. I tell myself there's a rational answer for everything. But late at night, when the world is quiet and the memories creep back in, I'm not so sure. My eldest son started sleepwalking when he was about 8 or 9. I'd heard of kids going through phases like that, so I wasn't too concerned at first. It was one of those things, a little unsettling, sure, but nothing I thought much of. I'm a light sleeper. None of my kids have ever been able to sneak around the house at night without me noticing. That's actually how I first discovered the sleepwalking. Most nights, I'd wake up and find my son standing in the hallway outside our bedroom, walking slowly on his heels, shifting his weight from foot to foot. His eyes would be open, but they weren't seeing. If you've ever lived with a sleepwalker, you'll know exactly what I mean. His gaze passed right through me, empty, distant, like he was looking beyond me into something I couldn't see. It was always unnerving. Sometimes, he'd mumble under his breath, slurred words I couldn't make out. Other times, he'd just stand there, breathing slowly. Somehow, that made it worse. I'd guide him gently back to bed, whispering his name and telling him it was okay. He never remembered any of it in the morning. Things escalated a few months later. One night, I woke up to a soft, rhythmic tapping. It sounded like water dripping onto a window pane, only it wasn't raining outside. At first, I thought it was part of a dream, some half-heard sound my sleeping brain had latched onto. But as I lay there listening, I realized the tapping was real, steady, deliberate, not random like rain. It happened at regular intervals, always the same volume. It wasn't the house settling. It wasn't wind. It was too precise. Finally, I sat up. The sound was coming from the hallway. My husband was still asleep, so I got up on my own. I wasn't scared, just curious. If I'd felt fear, maybe I would have woken him up. When I stepped into the hallway, I saw my son. He was standing with his forehead pressed to the wall, lightly tapping it in slow, measured knocks. His fingers grazed the wall in rhythm with his head, like he was trying to feel his way through it. I whispered his name. No reaction. I took a step closer, and something about the way he moved made the hair on my arms stand up. There was no twitchiness, no randomness, just that strange, eerie rhythm, like he wasn't sleepwalking aimlessly but following some kind of invisible cue. Still, I reached out, placed a hand on his shoulder, and gently shook him. He blinked, stepped back once, and let me guide him back to bed like nothing had happened. He didn't mention it the next morning. It happened a few more times, but not often. Eventually, he outgrew it. The sleepwalking stopped. That strange vacant stare in the hallway became nothing more than a weird little memory I filed away and forgot about, until it happened again. Years later, my younger son started sleepwalking too. At first, I brushed it off. Kids go through phases. Some behaviors repeat themselves. But there was something uncanny about it. It wasn't just that he sleepwalked. It was how he sleepwalked. He stood in the hallway shifting his weight from foot to foot. His eyes were open but vacant. He moved with the same slow, eerie rhythm as his brother had years earlier. I started feeling like I was watching a memory replay in real time. And then came the night I heard the tapping again. I knew exactly what I'd find before I even stepped into the hallway. Sure enough, there he was, standing in the exact same spot. Forehead pressed to the wall, fingers grazing the surface, knocking in that same slow rhythm, like he was trying to step into something that wasn't there. I called his name. Nothing. Touched his shoulder. Still nothing. He just kept tapping. Gently, precisely, as his body swayed, lost in some unreachable space, and that's when it hit me. He had never seen his older brother sleepwalk. His brother hadn't done it in years. There was no way he could be mimicking him. The behavior wasn't just similar, it was identical. Every detail. Right down to the taps. Right down to the same damn spot on the wall. That thought made me feel sick. Eventually, I managed to snap him out of it, led him back to bed, tucked him in like I had so many times before, and told myself, again, that it was just one of those things. And then, just like his brother, he outgrew it. No more sleepwalking, no more tapping, no memory of any of it. For years, I didn't think about it. I had honestly forgotten the whole thing. Until recently. My sons are off at college now. The house feels a lot quieter than I'm used to. To pass the time, my husband and I decided to start renovating. Nothing major, just fresh paint, new floors, modern touches here and there. We started stripping old wallpaper when we noticed something odd beneath it. At first, I thought it was backing material, or maybe some weird stain, but as more of the paper peeled away, I froze. It was a mirror, an old antique-style mirror, built into the wall, covered up. My first thought was, why would someone cover a mirror instead of just removing it? I know it sounds silly, but I stood there staring at it like it was dangerous, like we weren't supposed to find it. And then I realized something that made my skin crawl. The mirror was in the exact same spot on the wall where my sons had been pressing their foreheads. The very spot they both tried to walk through without ever knowing it was there. Hidden for decades beneath wallpaper, and forget the fact that they were sleepwalking. They couldn't have known. There was no way they could have seen it, but somehow they had. I ripped that mirror out of the wall the same day, threw it away. Didn't even want it in the house. Still, I can't stop thinking about it. There has to be a rational explanation for all of this. But if there is, I haven't found it. And honestly, I'm not sure I want to.